In this section of our Factoring Polynomials chapter, we're going to look at trinomials again, but we're going to look at trinomials that do not have a 1 in front of the squared term. So let's go back and add this to our chart. Actually, I've already added it. I'll just sort of point it out. So again, we're looking at trinomials. We call this the long process because it is different than that short process, but it relies on the factor by grouping method that we have learned before. Obviously, there's 3 terms and the answer looks like FOIL, just like with the trinomial short. So the best way for me to teach this to you is just to do an example. So let's look at the first one. First thing I hope you notice is that the x squared term does not have an implied 1. It has a 3. And unlike others that we've done, I cannot factor that 3 out. It is not a GCF because of that 11. So how is it included in the process? Step 1, you multiply the 3 times the positive 6 to give us positive 18. And now we just follow the procedure that we've done with the trinomial short. We want factors of positive 18 that combine to make positive 11. That's positive 9 and positive 2. This is where this method is different, along with multiplying. These two numbers don't represent the factors like they do in the short method. If this was the short method, it would just be x plus 9 times x plus 2. They represent something different. And what I am going to write here is going to tell you how to use those two numbers. So it's called bring down, break down, and bring down, and you won't find this anywhere else because I made it up, but it works great. You notice there's 3 sets of instructions. There are 3 terms. Each set tells you what to do with each term. So the first one, bring down, means take the first term and bring it down by writing it again. The second one, and this is the important one, says break down. We take the second term and we break it into 2 pieces. And guess what the 2 pieces are? It's these 2 pieces. So I'm going to break an 11x into a positive 9x and a positive 2x. So notice the 2 numbers had x's added to them so that if I recombine them, they would make 11x. So that's the key to what these 2 factors represent in this method. The last says bring down, so I bring down my last term. From here, you actually already know what to do. Because notice the number of terms. 1, 2, 3, 4. What do we always do with 4 terms? We group them. There is a positive in between, so there's no need to make any type of correction on this one. So I go ahead and I factor out the GCF of the first binomial, which is 3x. You're left with x plus 3. Bring down your sign. GCF here is 2. You're left with x plus 3. These 2 match. That is my first factor, and my second factor is 3x plus 2. So once I get to this step, I'm back to factor by grouping. So there's really not that much new. It's how you use these 2 numbers and the fact that you had to multiply to begin. So let's try another one. It's a good review of factor by grouping too. Here there's no GCF I can factor out. There's not a 1 in the front, so I have to say 8 times positive 5 is positive 40. I want factors that add up to negative 22. To get a positive when I multiply, I need a positive times a positive or a negative times a negative. But since this is negative, when I add them, I know I'm going to be having 2 negatives. So let's try. 40 times 1, both negatives, that won't work. 20 times 2, both negatives, that will do it. And I have my 2 numbers, but they are not my 2 factors. So I bring down, I break down my middle term into these 2 pieces. It doesn't matter which one you write first. Minus 2x minus 20x. Notice I added the x's to them. And I bring down my last. Now I have 1, 2, 3, 4. We know how to do the rest. I group and group. There's a negative in between, so don't forget to make that correction on your last term only. GCF of the first binomial is 2x, and I'm left with 4x minus 1. Bring down that minus. GCF here is a 5, and I'm left with 4x minus 1. They match, so 4x minus 1 is my first factor, and 2x minus 5 is my second factor. It's not that difficult of a process, but it is longer. I will tell you this though, if you're only going to learn one process, either the short or the long for trinomial, learn the long, because it would work for all instances. In fact, I could do that. If there was a 1 here, I could still do 1 times whatever. It would work, but the short process does not work in this case. So this one is a more inclusive process. All right, let's look at the next one. I can't factor out that 2 because of the 11, so I say 2 times positive 12 is positive 24. I want factors that combine to make negative 11. That's negative 8 and negative 3. I'm assuming by now that you're able to come up with the two numbers. So we bring down. We're going to break down the 11 into a negative 3x and a negative 8x. It wouldn't matter the order that you write them. It would have been easier to do it in the other order, by the way. And I bring down my last. I now group. I see that negative, so I make my correction. The GCF here is just x, and I'm left with 2x minus 3. Bring down your minus. The GCF here is 4, and I'm left with 2x minus 3. They match, so 2x minus 3 is my first factor, and x minus 4 is my second. And we're just going to keep cranking these out, because the more of these you do, the better you will get the process. Here, 6 times positive 1, I want factors of positive 6 that combine to make negative 5. Those are negative 3 and negative 2, but I want to stop a second. These two numbers sometimes cause a problem, because I bet some of you were thinking this. It is true that a negative 6 and a positive 1, when I add them, would make a negative 5. But the problem is they do not make a positive 6 when I multiply. That's the reason why showing the sign is so important. So here are my two numbers. So I bring down my first. I break down my middle term into negative 3x minus 2x. Bring down my last. Group. Make my correction, and now let's factor out the GCF. It's 3x here. Bring down your minus. The GCF of 2x minus 1 is just 1. 2x minus 1. These match, so that is my first factor, and my second factor is 3x minus 1. Let me move this up so we've got room on this last one. Here again, I'm going to multiply 8 times positive 5. That's positive 40. I want factors that combine to make negative 14. Those two, for some reason, kind of jump out at me. Negative 10 and negative 4. That happens sometimes. You just sort of see them. So I bring down. I'm going to break down this. I'm going to write this one first so that it's paired up with the 8 minus 10x, and bring down the last. Group. Once again, we have that correction to make. The GCF here is a 4x, and I'm left with 2x minus 1. Bring down the minus. The GCF here is a 5, and we're left with 2x minus 1. And I'm sort of out of space. I'll write it over here. The matching factors are 2x minus 1, and the other factor is 4x minus 5. So that is the basic process. On the second page, we're going to look at some, like I always like to do, that have some idiosyncrasies. Something a little bit different about them. We'll look at 2 more. So let's look at this first one. You notice the idiosyncrasy here is that it's x4 and x2. This method takes care of that so well that it's not really a problem. So I go ahead and I multiply negative 24. I want factors that combine to make negative 5. To get a negative 24, I need a positive and a negative, but if there are negative leftovers, then the larger number must be negative. So I believe it's negative 8 and positive 3. So I bring down the first. Now, here's where this method has the idiosyncrasy. The middle term is a negative 5x squared. So what has to be added to these two numbers is an x squared. So plus 3x squared minus 8x squared, bring down minus 8. Because remember, if I were now to recombine them, I should end up back with what I started with. So those have to be x squareds. Group, make your correction. The GCF of the first binomial is 3x squared, and you're left with x squared minus 1. Bring down your minus. The x squared, excuse me, that was a plus. I don't know where I said a minus. The GCF of the next binomial is an 8, and you're left with x squared plus 1. My two matching factors are x squared plus 1, and then the last factor is 3x squared minus 8. So the idiosyncrasy was that this wasn't an x, and you had to remember to make these match what you had there. The last one is another combination. If you will look at these three terms, you'll see that there is a GCF. I have a GCF. I can factor out a 2 and an x squared. So I'm going to write that GCF in a different color, 2x squared. And now I'm going to write what's left and continue, and I'll show you how this GCF comes into play. So 2 goes into 24 12 times. X squared cross cancels 2 of those, leaving x squared. 2 goes into 40 20 times. X squared cross cancels 2 of those, leaving x. 2 goes into 6 3 times, and the x squareds cross cancel. Now for now, I'm going to ignore this GCF, although it will come into play later at the end. And I want to just deal with what's in the parentheses. This in and of itself is a long process. So 12 times positive 3 is positive 36, and I need factors that add up to positive 20. Those would be 18 and 2, both positive. Ignoring my GCF, I bring down, I'm going to break down this into these two pieces, so plus 2x plus 18x, and now I bring down my last. We're going to group, just like we've been doing. There's a plus in between, so no need for a correction. 2x is my GCF, and I'm left with 6x plus 1. Bring down the plus. 3 is my GCF, and I'm left with 6x plus 1. So 6x plus 1 times 2x plus 3 are my factors for this part. But now is when you have to bring this down. This is part of the answer also. So if I was going to check this, I would FOIL first and then take my FOILed answer and multiply it by 2x squared to get back to where I started.